On the night of February 28th, 2026, something happened that no intelligence agency on Earth was fully prepared for. The United States and Israel launched a surprise military attack on Iran, a country of 90 million people, while peace negotiations were still actively underway. In the opening hours of that attack, Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei was killed, the man who had ruled Iran with an iron fist for 34 years, the man who called the United States the Great Satan, who funded Hezbollah, who pushed Iran's nuclear program to the edge, was dead. And then Iran did something the world had spent decades fearing. It closed the Strait of Hormuz. That single action, shutting a narrow 33-kilometer-wide waterway between Iran and Oman, sent shockwaves through every single country on Earth. Because through that strait flows roughly 20% of the world's entire oil and natural gas supply. Every drop that doesn't pass through the Strait of Hormuz is a drop the world doesn't get. Oil prices exploded, flights across the Middle East were grounded, shipping companies rerouted entire fleets. Millions of people in Asia woke up to fuel shortages, and the global economy, already fragile, started shaking. All of this happened in a matter of days. This is the story of what has been, without question, the most dramatic, unexpected, and world-altering crisis of 2026. And today, we are going to walk through every single piece of it. From the secret protest that started it, to the assassination that changed everything, to where things stand right now as a ceasefire hangs by a thread. Let's start from the beginning. To understand how we got here, you need to go back to January 2026 and the protests that shook Iran to its foundation. These were not ordinary protests. Iranian citizens have taken to the streets many times before. In 2009, in 2019, in 2022. But what began in January 2026 was, by any measure, the largest uprising Iran had seen since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, the revolution that created the regime in the first place. The Iranian government's response was catastrophic. On January 8th, security forces began shooting live ammunition directly into crowds of protesters. 6 hospitals in Tehran alone recorded 217 deaths in a single day. Hospitals in other cities were overwhelmed. In Rasht, 70 bodies arrived at Porsina Hospital in just one night. In Shiraz, hospitals didn't have enough surgeons to treat the wounded. By January 10th, analysts at Iran International were estimating that 2,000 protesters had been killed in just 48 hours. And the Iranian government's response to all of this was to pull the plug on the internet. A near-total internet blackout descended across the country, making it nearly impossible for Iranians to communicate with the outside world, for journalists to report from the ground, or for human rights organizations to document what was happening. But the killings continued. By January 25th, the total estimated death toll ranged from over 6,488 confirmed deaths all the way up to estimates of 36,500 or more, depending on the source. Time magazine reported that a specific list had documented over 30,000 protest-related deaths registered in civilian hospitals for January 8th and 9th alone. On January 12th, Iran's own foreign ministry spokesman Esmail Baghaei did something extraordinary. He publicly confirmed that security forces had directly shot at protesters. It was a rare, open acknowledgement by the Iranian government of what it was doing to its own people. During his State of the Union address on February 24, 2026, President Donald Trump told the American public that 32,000 protesters had been killed. He also claimed at that address that Iran had restarted its nuclear program and was developing missiles capable of striking the United States. The world was watching Iran burn from within, and the United States was about to make sure it burned from without as well. February 28, 2026. The United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, a coordinated large-scale military assault on Iran. And the timing was what made it truly shocking. These attacks began while diplomatic negotiations between Iran and the US were still actively underway. Let that sink in. The two countries were talking peace. And then the bombs fell. The opening strikes were devastating in their precision and in their scope. According to Britannica, multiple confirmed sources, and reporting from Al Jazeera, CNN, and Wikipedia. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed in the initial wave of Israeli airstrikes. Khamenei had ruled Iran since 1989. 34 years of supreme authority over every aspect of Iranian life. He was the man behind the nuclear program, behind the support for Hamas and Hezbollah, behind the crackdowns on protesters, behind the Death to America chants that became the regime's unofficial anthem. He was, in the eyes of the Iranian government, the closest thing the country had to God's representative on earth. He was dead before dawn on March 1st. Iranian state media confirmed his death the following day. The IRGC-controlled Fars news agency reported that Khamenei's daughter, son-in-law, grandchild, and daughter-in-law were also killed in the same strikes. But it didn't stop there. Also killed in the opening hours of Operation Epic Fury, Iranian Defense Minister Aziz Nasirzadeh. 4 top Ministry of Intelligence officials, Chief of Staff Abdulrahim Mousavi, Head of Khamenei's military office, Mohammad Shirazi, head of Iran's Nuclear Defense Research Organization, Hossein Jabal Amelian, former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. In total, over 40 senior officials, military commanders, intelligence chiefs, and government ministers were reported killed in the initial strikes. The attacks also inflicted terrible civilian casualties. One missile struck a girls' school adjacent to a naval base in Manab, near Bandar Abbas, killing approximately 170 people. The Iranian government declared 40 days of mourning, and then it did something that shook the entire global order. Iran's retaliation came in 2 forms, and both were catastrophic in their own way. First, Iran launched hundreds of retaliatory missiles and thousands of drones across the Middle East, targeting U.S. embassies, military installations, oil infrastructure, and vessels in the Strait of Hormuz throughout the region. The strikes hit Gulf Arab states, U.S. bases in the region, and targets inside Israel. Second, and this is the part that affected every single person on Earth, Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway between Iran and Oman. At its narrowest point, it is only about 33 kilometers wide, and yet through this one small gap passes approximately 20% of the world's entire supply of oil and natural gas. Saudi oil, UAE oil, Qatari gas, Kuwaiti oil, all of it flows through the Strait of Hormuz before reaching Asia, Europe, and the rest of the world. Japan gets roughly 90% of its oil imports through this waterway. South Korea, India, China, all massively dependent on it. When Iran closed the strait, the effects were immediate and global. Oil prices surged. Flights across the Middle East were grounded or rerouted. Shipping companies rerouted entire fleets to avoid the region. Fuel shortages began emerging in parts of Asia. Global stock markets plunged. Tehran itself became, in the words of reporters on the ground, a ghost town, as civilians feared. Going outside the IRGC's Joint Military Command issued a statement saying the Strait of Hormuz was now under strict management and control of Iranian armed forces, and that any vessel attempting to pass without permission will be considered cooperation with the enemy and the offending vessel will be targeted. This was not a bluff. Iranian forces opened fire on ships attempting to pass. A French shipping company, CMA-CGM, confirmed that warning shots were fired at one of its vessels. The IRGC turned back tankers and forced dozens of ships to reverse course. Meanwhile, back in Tehran, as news of Khamenei's death broke, security forces were deployed to prevent an uprising, with footage emerging showing them opening fire on people celebrating in the streets and shooting at Iranians chanting from behind the windows of their own homes. The internet blackout was extended. According to NetBlocks, internet connectivity in Iran dropped to just 4% of ordinary levels, exceeding 240 hours at one point, making it the second longest internet shutdown in Iran's history. The Iranian government began distributing what they called white SIM cards, special cards that bypassed internet filters, to government supporters to allow them to push the regime's messaging while ordinary Iranians remained cut off from the world. While the missiles were flying and the strait was closed, Iran faced an immediate and existential question. Who was in charge? The supreme leader was dead. The defense minister was dead. The chief of staff was dead. 4 of the top intelligence officials were dead. And the country was in the middle of a war. On March 8, 2026, just 8 days after his father's assassination, Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the slain supreme leader, was elected to replace his father as supreme leader of Iran. Mojtaba's elevation was swift, but not without controversy. Iran's top leaders, and including Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, President Masoud Pezeshkian, and IRGC commanders, pledged their allegiance to the younger Khamenei. But the reality on the ground was chaotic. By late March, the New York Times described Iran's leadership as paralyzed, with a severely disrupted decision-making process. The damage to communications infrastructure, much of it targeted in the US-Israeli strikes, created paranoia and internal power struggles within the regime. Commanders weren't sure who was in charge of what. Intelligence agencies were decimated. Military chains of command had been shattered at the top. Evin Prison, the notorious facility where Iran holds political prisoners, saw its prisoners receiving only limited bread and water as supplies were disrupted by the war. Over 70,000 Afghan refugees in Iran returned to Afghanistan in the first 2 weeks of March, frequently under forced circumstances, as the war made their already precarious situation untenable, even as Afghanistan itself faced a severe humanitarian crisis. And the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, nearly 6 weeks after his appointment, he had still not made a single public appearance. CNN's reporters noted growing curiosity about his health and whereabouts. The man tasked with leading Iran through its worst crisis in decades was essentially invisible. For over 5 weeks, the war raged, and then on April 7th to 8th, 2026, something happened that surprised almost everyone. A ceasefire was reached. The agreement was brokered by Pakistan, which had emerged as an unlikely but crucial mediator between the two sides. According to Britannica's coverage of the conflict, Trump announced the ceasefire on social media. And moments later, Iranian officials confirmed that Mojtaba Khamenei had approved it after a last-minute nudge by China. Both Pakistan and China played essential roles in getting the two sides to stop shooting. The ceasefire was a 2-week agreement, a fragile truce as U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance himself described it. Its terms were complex. Iran agreed to a temporary halt in hostilities. The U.S. agreed to certain conditions, though it maintained its naval blockade of Iranian ports. Iran was expected to allow the Strait of Hormuz to reopen for commercial shipping. Further peace talks were to follow in Islamabad, Pakistan. On April 11th, a high-powered U.S. delegation arrived in Islamabad for negotiations, led by Vice President J.D. Vance, along with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. The same trio had previously helped negotiate a ceasefire in Gaza, and Witkoff had held talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin over Ukraine. Now they were sitting down with Iranian officials to try to end a war, but the ceasefire immediately began unraveling. Iran's parliamentary speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf said the ceasefire agreement had been violated and that a bilateral ceasefire or negotiations is unreasonable. By April 9th, ships were once again being prevented from passing through the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S., meanwhile, maintained its blockade of Iranian ports, which Iran called a violation of the ceasefire. Trump praised the blockade, claiming it was costing Iran $500 million a day, while the United States loses nothing. On April 16th, resistance forces inside Iran of the PMOI resistance units launched a coordinated nationwide offensive, carrying out 15 fiery operations across Iran, targeting government centers and symbols of the regime, in direct response to a fresh wave of political executions by the Iranian government. As of this week, right now, April 20th, 2026, the situation is on a knife's edge. No more Mr. Nice Guy. He also warned Iran not to try to blackmail Washington, saying, "We have a blockade, and unfortunately we have to start dropping bombs again if the ceasefire expires without a deal." Hit the like button if this breakdown helped you understand what's actually going on. And drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think a deal will get done before Wednesday, or are we heading back to war?